I never thought much about taxis or ride shares. They were just convenient tools for getting around when our second car was in the shop, or when one of us had a few too many drinks at dinner. My wife, Melissa, loved the convenience of them even more than I did. She worked as an event coordinator, constantly bouncing between venues and client meetings. I figured it made sense for her to rely on rides when she didn't feel like driving. It started as a casual mention. "Alex," she said one evening as she dropped her purse by the door, "I had the nicest driver today. His name's Sam. He was polite, not chatty, and, get this, he remembered me from last time. Isn't that sweet?" I barely looked up from my laptop. "That's nice, babe," I said absently, tapping away at my email. Work had been piling up, and I was drowning in deadlines. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? Over the next few weeks, Sam became a frequent character in Melissa's stories. "Sam said the funniest thing today," she'd chuckle. Or, "Sam gave me a great tip about this new Italian place. We should try it sometime." At first, I didn't notice the pattern. It was just background noise, details about her day that I filed away without much thought. Then I noticed how often she was using ride shares. "Isn't it expensive taking Ubers every day?" I asked one evening as we sat down for dinner. She rolled her eyes a little too dramatically. "Alex, do you know how exhausting it is to drive all over town in traffic? Besides, it's not every day." Except it was. I'd see the receipts in our shared inbox, but I didn't push it. Melissa had always been a little dramatic, prone to exaggeration, but I loved her in spite of it. Or maybe because of it. It kept things interesting, I suppose. Things started feeling off a couple of months later. She began staying out later than usual, often blaming it on client emergencies or last-minute planning crises. When she came home, her energy was erratic. Sometimes she was overly sweet and affectionate. Other times, she was irritable, snapping at me over trivial things. One night, as we sat watching a mindless TV show, her phone buzzed. She snatched it off the coffee table faster than I'd ever seen her move, glancing at the screen and tucking the phone into her lap. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "No one. Just a work thing," she said a little too quickly, her eyes glued to the screen. I didn't press her. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she'd never given me a reason not to trust her. We'd been married for 6 years, and although things weren't perfect, what marriage was, I thought we were solid. I didn't see the cracks forming right in front of me. Looking back, I wish I had paid closer attention. To the phone she never let out of her sight. To the late-night showers and hastily washed clothes. To the faint trace of cologne I didn't recognize. But I didn't. Not yet. As the weeks rolled on, I started noticing more things that didn't sit right. Melissa was dressing up more often, even for routine errands. Tight skirts, high heels, and a touch of makeup, things she didn't usually bother with unless we were going out. I tried to compliment her, thinking maybe she was just sprucing things up for her own confidence. "You look great today," I'd say, smiling. She'd shrug. "Just felt like putting in a little effort." Nothing wrong with that, is there? Of course not. But it nagged at me. Then there were the work dinners. They came up out of nowhere, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. "Sorry, Alex, I have to meet a client." "I'll be late," she'd text. By the time she got home, I'd already be in bed. I started to feel like a roommate rather than a husband. One night, I decided to call her out on it. "You've been really busy lately," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Are they giving you more responsibility at work?" She glanced up from her plate, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you keeping tabs on me? I'm just doing my job, Alex. It's not my fault you're sitting here in your little routine while I'm out making things happen." The words stung, but I didn't want to escalate it. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just worried we haven't been spending much time together." "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "We see each other every night. What more do you want?" I wanted a wife who didn't treat me like an afterthought. The next week, I decided to surprise her. I booked a reservation at her favorite restaurant and sent her a text while she was at work. "Dinner tonight at 7. Just us. No excuses." She replied hours later. "Can't. Late meeting. Sorry." I felt like an idiot. Something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't shake the feeling anymore. Melissa was evasive and defensive any time I asked questions, so I started keeping my own tabs. One Saturday, she told me she was heading out to meet a client for coffee. After she left, I pulled up her Uber receipt. It showed her being dropped off at a park nearly an hour away. No coffee shops nearby. No office buildings. Just a park. Curiosity gnawed at me. I grabbed my keys and drove out there, parking discreetly a block away. My heart pounded as I spotted her, sitting on a bench, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a leather jacket. They sat close, too close. Her hand brushed his arm as she laughed. I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to storm over, but I froze. What was I even going to say? I didn't have proof of anything yet. Instead, I went home, stewing in anger and confusion. When she returned hours later, she greeted me with a cheery, "Hey, babe," as if nothing had happened. "How was the meeting?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Good," she replied breezily. "Productive." I didn't confront her. Not then. I wasn't ready. But I'd started to see the cracks, and I couldn't unsee them. After seeing Melissa at the park with that man, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I tried to convince myself it was innocent. Maybe he was just a client, and I was jumping to conclusions. But something about the way they sat, the way she laughed, didn't feel right. The next time I noticed her Uber receipt, I paid closer attention. There was his name again. Always Sam. Every single ride she booked for weeks was with him. I decided to test the waters. "So, this Sam guy drives you a lot," I said one evening while we ate dinner. Melissa barely looked up. "Yeah, I guess. He's reliable." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, keeping my tone casual. "It's kind of unusual to get the same driver so often, isn't it?" She shrugged, her fork clinking against her plate. "I don't know. Maybe he's just always nearby when I request a ride. It's not a big deal." Her answer seemed rehearsed, and her dismissive tone only deepened my suspicion. The next day, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. Melissa had a lunch meeting downtown, so I stayed home from work and waited until I saw her get picked up. Sure enough, Sam's black sedan pulled up in front of our house. She hopped in, and I followed them from a distance. They didn't go downtown. Instead, they drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town. I parked across the street and watched as they walked inside together. Melissa's hand brushed his shoulder as they laughed, their faces closer than they needed to be. I sat there for over an hour, watching them through the diner's window. They were completely at ease with each other, leaning in close, laughing, and sharing what looked like an intimate conversation. It was clear this wasn't their first time meeting outside of work. When they finally left, I followed them again, my heart pounding. They didn't head back to Melissa's supposed client meeting. Instead, Sam drove them to a secluded area by the river. I parked a safe distance away and watched as they got out of the car, walked to the water's edge, and sat on a bench. They looked like a couple, not like a driver and his passenger. This time, I took photos. When Melissa came home that evening, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How was your meeting?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Good," she replied without hesitation. I stared at her, waiting for some sign of guilt, some crack in her facade. But Melissa was a master liar. She didn't flinch. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I felt like a stranger in my own home, sleeping next to a woman I no longer recognized. I knew then that this wasn't going to end well. The day after I followed Melissa to the diner and the river, I couldn't shake the image of her with Sam. The way she laughed, leaned into him, it wasn't something you did with a driver or a client. It was intimacy, plain and simple, but I needed undeniable proof. Something Melissa couldn't worm her way out of with lies or manipulation. So when she told me she had another meeting 2 days later, I was ready. Melissa called for a ride right after lunch. I pretended to be busy working from home, giving her a distracted nod as she grabbed her purse and kissed me on the cheek. "Don't wait up," she said, her voice light. I watched from the living room window as Sam's familiar black sedan pulled up. She slid into the passenger seat this time, not the back like someone merely hiring a ride. That was the first red flag. I waited a few minutes before following. They drove out of town, heading toward the same secluded riverbank they'd been at before. I kept a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest. When they parked, I pulled over a short way down the road, turning off my engine and stepping out of my car quietly. Sam's car was parked under a large oak tree, its shade concealing most of what was happening inside. But the car wasn't completely hidden. It was partially visible from my vantage point as I moved closer, staying low and quiet. And that's when I saw it. Melissa's seat was reclined, her skirt hiked up to her thighs. Sam was leaning over her, his hands gripping her hips as she arched toward him. Her laughter rang out, high and breathless, followed by a soft moan that made my stomach churn. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I'd spent 6 years building a life with, was sprawled out in another man's car, letting him touch her in ways that were supposed to be mine alone. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, snapping pictures and recording a short video. I needed this, not for revenge, but for the truth, for when she inevitably tried to twist the story. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to rip the door open and drag her out. But something stopped me. Instead, I watched as they kissed, their movements growing more frantic. Her voice carried in the stillness, breathy and low. "You're so much better than him," she said, her words like a knife in my chest. I clenched my fists, biting back the urge to scream. After what felt like an eternity, they sat up, adjusting their clothes and laughing like teenagers caught in a forbidden tryst. Melissa's skirt was still askew as she leaned over to kiss him one more time. That was when I turned and walked back to my car, my mind racing. By the time I got home, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. My world was falling apart, but a strange sense of clarity had settled over me. This wasn't just some fling. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't thought possible. And now, I had all the proof I needed to confront her and end this sham of a marriage. The day after witnessing Melissa and Sam together, I couldn't shake the burning anger simmering beneath my skin. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the audacity. Melissa had no shame, and Sam, well, he wasn't just some random fling. He was complicit. He knew she was married, and he didn't care. I decided I needed to face him man to man. It wasn't hard to track him down. His rideshare profile had a photo and a first name, and from there, I found him on social media. Sam's posts painted a picture of a carefree, laid-back guy. Photos of his car, hiking trips, and the occasional inspirational quote about living in the moment. I sent him a message. "We need to talk. You know who I am. Meet me at the old diner off Route 6, 7 p.m. tonight. Don't make me come looking for you." He didn't reply, but I knew he'd show up. Men like Sam don't like complications, and ignoring me would only make things messier for him. When I arrived at the diner, he was already there, leaning against his car with his arms crossed. He looked every bit the cocky, carefree guy I expected. Leather jacket, scruffy beard, and a smirk that made my blood boil. "You're Alex, right?" he said as I walked up. "You know damn well who I am." I snapped. He held up his hands defensively. "All right, calm down." I figured this was coming eventually. I stepped closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You've been sleeping with my wife." Sam didn't flinch. If anything, his smirk deepened. "Look, man, I'm not the one who made the first move. She's the one who's unhappy. Maybe you should ask yourself why she's coming to me instead of you." His words hit like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't here to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "So that makes it okay. You knew she was married, and you didn't care." He shrugged, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. "She's not the first married woman I've been with. She won't be the last." That did it. I grabbed him by the jacket, slamming him against his car. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of fear. "You think this is a joke?" I hissed. "You think you could just screw around with another man's wife and walk away without consequences?" "Hey man, take it easy," Sam stammered, raising his hands. "I didn't force her to do anything. She's a grown woman. If you want to be mad at her." I released him, stepping back. He wasn't wrong. Melissa was just as guilty, maybe more so. But Sam's smug attitude made it hard to think straight. "Consider this your warning," I said, my voice low and steady. "Stay away from her. If I catch you with her again, I won't just be having a conversation." Sam nodded quickly, his cockiness replaced with nervous compliance. "Alright, man. I get it." Message received. I turned and walked back to my car, my hands still shaking with adrenaline. Confronting Sam didn't erase the pain, but it felt like a small victory. Now it was time to confront Melissa. After my confrontation with Sam, I expected Melissa to sense something was off. I wasn't exactly subtle about my mood when she got home that night. I didn't kiss her hello, didn't ask about her day, and barely responded to her attempt at small talk. But she didn't seem to care. Melissa had always been good at brushing things under the rug. To her, a lack of confrontation meant there wasn't a problem. And in her twisted way, she was probably glad I wasn't asking questions. A few days later, she announced she had another late meeting. This time, my instinct screamed at me not to let it slide. Sam might have agreed to stay away, but Melissa wasn't the type to give up her new plaything so easily. I decided to follow her again, this time with even more resolve. She left the house just after 6 p.m., dressed in a low-cut blouse and a skirt shorter than anything she'd worn in months. As soon as Sam's car pulled up, I felt the familiar churn of anger and nausea. So much for his message received. I followed them from a safe distance, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They didn't head to the usual spots this time. Instead, Sam's car veered onto a deserted back road that led to an old industrial area. Rusted warehouses and abandoned lots dotted the landscape. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. I parked a ways back and crept closer on foot, keeping to the shadows. Sam's car was parked near a derelict warehouse, its interior dimly lit by the glow of a streetlight. I peered through the cracked glass of a nearby window, and my heart dropped. Melissa was in the back seat, straddling Sam. Her blouse was unbuttoned, revealing far too much, and Sam's hands were gripping her hips as she moved against him. Their laughter and moans filled the air, every sound another dagger to my chest. I stood there frozen, unable to tear my eyes away. Melissa tilted her head back, letting out a breathless moan that made me feel sick. "God, you're so much better than Alex," she purred, her voice dripping with venom. That was it. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I stepped out of the shadows and stormed toward the car. Sam noticed me first, his eyes widening in alarm. "Shit," he yelled, pushing Melissa off him. Melissa scrambled to fix her blouse, her face a mixture of shock and rage. "Alex? What the hell are you doing here? What am I doing here?" I shouted, my voice shaking with fury. "What the hell are you doing, Melissa?" In the back seat of his car, like a... "Don't you dare finish that sentence," she screamed, her face twisting in anger. "You have no right to spy on me. No right," I barked, incredulous. "You're my wife. You're supposed to be loyal, not screwing your driver in an abandoned lot." "It's not what it looks like," she yelled, the blatant lie only fueling my rage. "Oh, really?" I shot back. "Because it looks like you're having sex with him." Melissa's eyes darted between me and Sam, who was awkwardly adjusting his clothes in the front seat. She let out a hysterical laugh, the kind that made my skin crawl. "You're pathetic, Alex. Always snooping, always looking for something to blame me for. Maybe if you were half the man Sam is, I wouldn't have to find satisfaction elsewhere." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Her words were cruel, calculated to hurt me as much as possible. "I'm done, Melissa," I said finally, my voice cold. "You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. We're finished." Her face shifted from anger to panic. "Alex, wait." But I didn't wait. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her and Sam in the wreckage of their own making. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa in the back of that car, laughing, moaning, and hurling her venomous words at me. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. By morning, I was done wallowing. I knew what I needed to do. Melissa hadn't come home. I didn't care where she was or what excuse she'd try to concoct later. The house was mine. I bought it before we got married, and her name was nowhere on the deed. It was time she understood she didn't have a free pass to disrespect me in my own life. I called my lawyer first thing and told him everything. He didn't mince words. "File for divorce immediately," he said. "If she's been unfaithful, this will work in your favor, especially since the house is solely yours. Consider it done." I replied, the cold finality of those words giving me a strange sense of peace. By noon, I'd started packing Melissa's things. I didn't care if she came back to explain herself. There was nothing she could say that would change the reality of what I'd seen. I started with her closet, pulling out dresses, shoes, and handbags and shoving them into garbage bags. Her vanity was next, makeup, jewelry, and the stupid little trinkets she loved cluttering the bathroom with. I found myself pausing over a framed photo of us from our honeymoon, her smile wide and carefree as she leaned against me. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. But then I remembered the way she'd laughed with Sam, her mockery of everything we'd built together, and that sadness turned to anger. I tossed the photo into a bag and kept going. By mid-afternoon, I'd gathered everything she owned into piles by the front door. Her clothes, her work files, her favorite books. I even pulled her toiletries out of the bathroom, leaving nothing but an empty toothbrush holder. When I was done, I texted her, "Your things are on the front porch. I'm filing for divorce. Don't come inside. You lost that privilege." I stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. The words felt harsh, but necessary. It didn't take long for her to respond. "Alex, stop being ridiculous. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Melissa. I saw everything. It's over." Her next messages came in rapid succession, each more frantic than the last. "You can't just throw me out. We need to talk, Alex. You're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't reply. There was no point in engaging with her lies or hysteria anymore. A couple of hours later, I heard the screech of tires in the driveway. Melissa stormed up to the porch, her face a mixture of rage and desperation. "You're really doing this?" she yelled, gesturing to the bags of her belongings. "Damn right I am," I said, standing firm in the doorway. "You don't live here anymore." Her voice rose to a shrill pitch. "You're such a coward, Alex. You can't even have a proper conversation. You mean like the ones you had with Sam in his back seat?" I shot back. Her face turned red, and for a moment, she looked like she might explode. Instead, she let out a humorless laugh. "Phoenix, be a bitter, pathetic man. See if I care. You'll regret this." I stepped back inside and closed the door in her face, her angry shouts muffled by the solid wood. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. She could scream, lie, and throw tantrums all she wanted, but I was done letting her chaos dictate my life. The next morning, I signed the divorce papers and had them sent to Melissa. There was no going back now. With the divorce papers signed and sent, I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. I wasn't just ending my marriage. I was taking my life back piece by piece. And I wasn't going to make it easy for Melissa. Not after the way she'd disrespected me. She had made her choices. Now, she'd face the consequences. The first thing I did was cancel all the credit cards she had access to. They were in my name anyway, and I wasn't about to fund her lifestyle while she played victim. Next, I called her office and informed her boss, an old acquaintance of mine, that Melissa wouldn't be available for work because of personal issues. Her reaction to losing control of her public persona would be priceless. But the real masterstroke was the house. Legally, it was mine, and I didn't waste any time changing the locks. I even installed a new security system with cameras. If she tried to sneak in or pull some stunt, I'd catch her in the act. Melissa, of course, didn't take it well. She showed up the next evening, banging on the door like a lunatic. The cameras captured every second of her tantrum, her screaming, her wild gestures, the way she threatened to ruin me if I didn't let her in. I didn't even bother answering. I watched her from the living room, sipping a beer as she spiraled into hysterics. When she finally left, red-faced and defeated, I sent her a text. "Keep showing up like that, and I'll file for a restraining order. You're trespassing now." Her response came immediately. "You're a monster, Alex. I gave you the best years of my life, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me lies and betrayal," I replied. "You got exactly what you earned." For the next few days, Melissa bombarded me with messages, angry texts, tearful voicemails, and even emails filled with poorly disguised manipulation. She alternated between begging me to take her back and accusing me of being the reason for her affair. I ignored every single one. Then I turned my attention to Sam. He thought he could worm his way out of this unscathed, But I wasn't about to let that happen. I dug through every piece of information I could find about him. His rideshare profile, his social media, and even a few records I accessed through less than legal means. Turns out, Sam had a lot to lose. He wasn't just a driver. He was a part-time real estate agent with a growing reputation in town. I made sure his clients knew about his extracurricular activities, sending anonymous messages to key figures in his network. Within a week, word spread like wildfire. His reputation took a hit, and he started losing clients. Melissa's messages became more desperate. "What did you do to Sam? He's saying his life is falling apart because of you." "I didn't do anything," I lied. "Maybe karma's just catching up to him." The cruelty felt justified. They had no problem destroying my life, so why should I hold back? By the end of the second week, Melissa's tone changed. She stopped demanding and started pleading. "Please, Alex, let's just talk. I'm sorry for everything. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But there was no making this right. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused me, to realize she'd lost everything because of her own selfishness. And I wasn't done yet. Melissa's pleading messages had become a daily occurrence, each one more pitiful than the last. She wanted to talk, to fix things, to somehow undo the wreckage she created. But I wasn't interested in reconciliation. She had made her bed, and I was going to make damn sure she lay in it. One morning, while sipping coffee and scrolling through my messages, I got another text from her. "Alex, please. I've lost everything. Just give me a chance to explain. I'll do anything." Her desperation was almost laughable. The woman who had once treated me like an afterthought now sounded like a beggar. I decided to reply for the first time in days. "Anything? Funny, that's exactly what you said to Sam in his car. Didn't seem to include respecting your marriage." The read receipt popped up immediately, but no response came. I imagined her sitting there, staring at her phone, seething with frustration. I went about my day, checking in with my lawyer and making arrangements to expedite the divorce process. I wanted it finalized as quickly as possible, no matter the cost. But my next move required a bit more finesse. Melissa's public image was everything to her. She loved being seen as the polished, successful professional with a picture-perfect life. So I decided to pull back the curtain. Using one of the photos I'd taken of her and Sam at the riverbank, the one where they were holding hands, completely oblivious to the world around them, I created an anonymous email account. From there, I sent the photo, along with a detailed account of her affair, to her coworkers, her closest friends, and even a few family members. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with calls and texts from mutual acquaintances, all shocked and scandalized. Melissa's friends, once loyal to her, were suddenly nowhere to be found. Even her parents called me, apologizing profusely for her behavior. That night, Melissa showed up at my door again. This time, she wasn't hysterical, she was broken. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She stood on the porch, clutching her phone and glaring at me through the glass. "Open the door, Alex," she said, her voice hoarse. "No." She banged her fist against the door. "You ruined my life. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know." I opened the door, just enough to look her in the eye. "You humiliated yourself, Melissa. I just made sure everyone saw who you really are." Tears streamed down her face, but there was no sympathy left in me. She had crushed my trust, my love, and my pride. Now, she was feeling what it was like to be on the other side. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have nothing left, Alex. No job, no friends, no home. I'll do anything. Just let me come back." I shook my head. "You didn't think about any of that when you were sneaking around with Sam, did you? You chose him over me. Go to him." She broke down completely, sinking to her knees on the porch. I watched her cry, my heart cold and unmoved. "Goodbye, Melissa," I said, closing the door. I stood there for a moment, listening as her sobs echoed in the night. But I didn't waver. This wasn't cruelty. It was justice. After everything had unraveled, the betrayal, the lies, and the cruel things I'd done in return, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I could have stayed angry, lashing out and letting bitterness rule my life, or I could let go of the pain and rebuild from the ashes. I chose the latter. The divorce was finalized a month later. The relief that washed over me when I signed the final papers was almost indescribable. It was as if a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had been lifted. I could finally breathe again. The first few weeks without Melissa in the house were strange. At first, it felt like the silence was deafening. I missed the noise of her constant presence, the trivial conversations, the way she moved through rooms, the sound of her voice filling the space. But I soon realized that the silence wasn't the absence of life. It was the space I needed to rediscover who I was. I started focusing on things I'd put aside for years. I picked up old hobbies, things that had once made me feel alive but had been lost in the chaos of my marriage. I picked up my guitar again and spent hours playing, letting the music be a balm for my wounds. I spent time at the gym, pushing myself physically, knowing that strength would come not just from the weights but from within. And then I began to forgive myself. It wasn't easy, not at first. There were days when the anger would flare up again, like a fire that never really went out. I thought about how cruel I had been in response to Melissa's betrayal, and I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered why I did it, why I had to protect myself. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing her behavior, or even letting her off the hook. It was about setting myself free from the anger that had tied me to her. As the months went by, I felt more like myself again. I started dating again, not because I was looking for a replacement, but because I was ready to experience love on my terms, without the weight of past mistakes. I met someone new, a woman who respected me, someone who didn't take me for granted. It was slow, tentative at first, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. One day, while I was out for a walk, I ran into Melissa. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a more understated outfit than the flashy clothes she'd once loved. She looked smaller somehow, not the confident woman I'd known, but someone who had weathered her own storm. I had no idea how I was supposed to feel in that moment. I didn't want to hate her anymore. I didn't want to feel anything. So I just stood there, watching her with a calmness that surprised even me. "Alex," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" I nodded, but I didn't offer any grand promises. We sat on a nearby bench, and for a moment, there was only the quiet of the world around us. "I know I hurt you," she started, looking down at her hands. "And I regret everything. I was selfish, and I never thought about how my actions would destroy us." I didn't say anything for a while. I wasn't looking for an apology, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally understanding the depth of what she'd done. "I don't want to rehash everything," I said finally, keeping my voice even. "But I'm better now. I'm healing, and I'm moving on with my life. I don't need your apology to do that. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm glad you're okay, Alex. I wanted you to know how sorry I am." I smiled softly. "I appreciate it, and I hope you find your own peace, Melissa. You deserve that too." With that, I stood up and left, walking away from the past and toward the future. Time has a strange way of moving forward, even when you're not sure you're ready. It had been a few months since that encounter with Melissa, and as I walked away from that moment, I realized how far I'd come. That chance meeting, with all its emotions and the weight of the past, didn't drag me back into old patterns. Instead, it helped cement my resolve to move forward. As the weeks passed, I started finding my rhythm. Life began to feel normal again. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Work had become something I looked forward to. I'd poured myself into a project that had been sitting on the back burner for too long. My colleagues noticed the shift in me, more confident, more present, and that didn't go unnoticed by those around me, including a woman named Emma. She had been a colleague for a while, but I'd always kept things strictly professional. She was smart, grounded, and shared my dry sense of humor. We started having lunch together more often, just talking about life, work, and the occasional bad movie. There was no rush between us. It felt like we were building a foundation, not jumping into anything. It was refreshing. For once, I wasn't thinking about what someone might want from me or what I was supposed to do to make them happy. Emma let me be me, and in return, I let her be her. One evening, after a long week, We went for drinks after work. The conversation was easy, and as we talked, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. The way she laughed at my jokes, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions, everything about her felt right. By the time the night ended, I realized I was no longer in the emotional fog I'd been in for so long. It was like a door had opened, and the light from the other side was finally beginning to shine through. "Want to grab dinner tomorrow?" Emma asked, glancing at me with a playful smile. "Sounds good," I said, my heart unexpectedly lifting. As the weeks went by, I found myself spending more time with her. We shared experiences, laughter, and quiet moments that were just as important. And through it all, I realized I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't trying to replace my past or fill a void. Emma was simply someone who made my life better. She wasn't a reaction to my marriage or Melissa's betrayal. She was her. One evening, as we were walking through a park, I took a deep breath and turned to her. "Emma," I started, my voice soft but steady. "I've been through a lot recently, and I know this might seem fast, but I feel like I'm ready to let someone in again." She smiled, her eyes warm. "I know, Alex. I've seen it, and I'm here, in whatever way you need me to be." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to be the perfect partner. I just needed to be me, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, I realized I had learned to trust again, not just her but myself. And with that, I finally understood what it meant to heal, not by erasing the past, but by growing from it. As the months passed, my life continued to evolve. I became more comfortable in my own skin, rediscovering parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd buried. There was no dramatic healing or grand epiphany. It was the steady work of small changes, of finding joy in simple moments, and of learning to live for myself, rather than in the shadow of the past. Emma and I grew closer, but not in a rush. There was a sense of ease between us, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. We traveled on weekends, explored new places, and tried new things, whether it was cooking a meal together or hiking through trails neither of us had ventured down before. It was as if the world was opening up to us, one step at a time. Yet there were still moments when I found myself thinking about the past. Not about Melissa specifically, but about the man I was before. The one who had been so trusting, so eager to please, and so ready to make sacrifices. I wasn't angry anymore, but there was a lingering sadness that remained. One evening, I sat in my apartment, looking out the window at the city lights. Emma had just left after another casual dinner at my place, and I felt a strange sense of clarity. The past wasn't something I could change or erase. It had shaped me, for better or worse, and it had led me to where I was now. I wasn't the same man I had been when I was married. I had become someone stronger, more self-aware, and capable of finding happiness on my own terms. I wasn't sure if Melissa had ever really understood that. She had never truly realized how much of my self-worth I had given to her. She had left, and in doing so had unknowingly freed me from a part of myself I needed to let go of. I knew I had to be honest with myself about something. I was ready to forgive her. Not for her, not to make her feel better or to let her off the hook, but for me. To release the anger and resentment I had carried for so long. It didn't excuse her actions, but it allowed me to move forward without that weight. That night, I decided to take another step in letting go. I took the last few items from the marriage that I hadn't gotten rid of, the pictures, the mementos, and the little things that had once meant something. They weren't reminders of love anymore. They were just things. So I put them all in a box, sealed it, and shoved it into the back of my closet. Out of sight, out of mind. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Emma called to check in, and we talked for a while about our plans for the weekend. "We should try that new seafood place downtown," she suggested. "Sounds perfect," I agreed. "Let's do it." As the days passed, I realized how much peace I had found. I no longer needed to dwell on the past. I had embraced the future, not with the need to forget, but with the understanding that the future had its own beauty. Melissa's chapter had ended, and it was time to close that book once and for all. The story was no longer about her. It was about me, about what I had become and what I was still becoming. It had been a year since I first signed the divorce papers, and in that time, I had changed in ways I hadn't even realized were possible. I used to be someone who defined his worth through the eyes of others, whether it was through the love of my wife, the expectations of friends, or the approval of colleagues. But that man was gone now. The person who had been betrayed and broken was no longer the one sitting here in this apartment. I had rebuilt myself from the inside out. Emma had been there through all of it, not as a solution to my pain, but as someone who helped me rediscover the joy of being with someone who truly respected me. She wasn't a rebound. She wasn't a means to an end. She was a person in her own right, kind, thoughtful, and independent. And in the midst of everything, I had learned to open my heart again, to trust again, and to love again. We had spent the last few months growing closer. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I admired her. There were no games, no manipulations, just two people who enjoyed being together. Our conversations were always easy, and there was a shared understanding that we were both bringing our best selves into the relationship without the need for pretense. That weekend, Emma and I had planned a trip to a small beach town a few hours away. It was a chance to escape, to recharge, and to enjoy some quiet time together. We rented a small cabin by the water, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. As we walked along the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to wash away all the doubts and fears I had carried with me for so long. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about the past or the mistakes I'd made. I was simply present, living in the moment. "Can you believe how perfect this is?" Emma asked, her voice light with amusement. I smiled, glancing at her as she picked up a small shell from the sand. "I don't think I've ever been so content." We stopped walking and sat on a large rock, watching the sunset in silence. It felt like the world was slowing down around us, giving us a moment to breathe. "Do you ever think about the future?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. I looked at her, surprised by the question. "I do, but it's different now. I'm not worried about what's next in the way I used to be. I've realized that sometimes the future just comes when you're ready for it. I'm learning to take things one day at a time." Emma nodded, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "That's a good way to live." In that moment, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. My past no longer defined me, and the future wasn't something I had to fear. With Emma by my side, I felt like I was moving forward, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. For the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I needed to be. After the weekend getaway, something shifted. The connection Emma and I had was undeniable, but it was more than that. It was genuine. We had both been through our own separate struggles, but now we were on a shared path, walking side by side. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come, not just in moving on from my marriage, but in learning what it really meant to love someone. As we sat in the cozy cabin, sipping our morning coffee and watching the sunrise over the water, I realized that the doubts I once carried about my future were no longer there. I had accepted the idea that life wasn't something to control, but rather something to experience, to embrace. And Emma had become a part of that experience. "I've been thinking," I began, breaking the comfortable silence. "I want us to keep building something here, something real. But I don't want to rush into anything. I want it to be right." Emma turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "I'm with you on that. I don't want to rush either. We've been building a solid foundation, and I think that's what matters." We smiled at each other, the understanding between us evident. There were no pretensions, no pressures, just two people who respected one another and were enjoying getting to know each other on a deeper level. But part of me still carried the remnants of my past. Though I had moved forward, the scars were still there. It wasn't that I feared being hurt again. It was that I wanted to make sure I wasn't repeating the same patterns I had once fallen into. "Do you ever think about what will look like a year from now?" Emma asked, breaking into my thoughts. "I don't know about a year from now," I replied, "but I do know that right now, I'm in a good place. I'm content with where we are. I'm learning to let go of my expectations and just enjoy being with you." Her smile grew wider, and she reached out, taking my hand in hers. "That sounds perfect to me." Over the next few weeks, we continued to spend time together, naturally progressing without forcing anything. It was different than what I had experienced before. There was no pressure to meet arbitrary timelines or expectations. Our connection grew at its own pace, and it felt right. Then, one evening, as we were cooking dinner together, something clicked for me. I realized that I wasn't just healing from my past. I was starting to dream again. The wounds from my previous relationship didn't define me anymore. Instead, I was beginning to think about the kind of future I wanted to create, both for myself and for the person I cared about. And maybe, just maybe, this future involved Emma. "Hey," I said, setting down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. "I've been thinking about something. What if we, took the next step? Not tomorrow, not next week, but when the time feels right. We're doing well, and I want to see where this goes." She paused, looking up from the stove, her eyes meeting mine. "I think I'd like that." In that moment, I knew that the past had no hold on me anymore. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. A year had passed since Emma and I first started spending time together. And in that year, I had learned so much about myself, about love, and about what it truly meant to move forward. The scars from my past had faded, not because they were erased, but because I had made peace with them. I had come to understand that my story didn't have to be defined by the mistakes of others. Emma and I had built something steady, something real, and most importantly, something that felt natural. It wasn't about needing someone to fill a void. It was about choosing to be with someone who made my life better, just as I wanted to make hers better. One evening, after we had enjoyed a simple dinner together, Emma and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping wine and watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was warm, and the sound of the city was muted, as if it were just the two of us in our own world. I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd be here in this place a year ago." Emma smiled, her eyes soft. "Me neither, but I think it's exactly where we're supposed to be." "I've been thinking about the future," I said, the words feeling different than they had before. "Not just about us, but about my life. I'm ready to keep growing. I'm ready to keep moving forward with you." She looked at me, her expression tender. "I'm ready too." And in that moment, I realized how far I had come. The man who had once been broken, who had questioned his worth and his future, was now standing strong, no longer defined by betrayal or fear. I had chosen to let go of the past and step into a future full of possibilities. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. We had learned to communicate, to support one another, and to embrace the imperfections that made us who we were. I no longer sought validation from others. I had learned to find strength within myself. I looked at Emma, my heart swelling with gratitude for the woman who had walked beside me through this journey. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Me too." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. Ready for love, ready for life, ready for whatever the future had in store. And with that, Alex and Emma began a new chapter together. Not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become through their shared growth and understanding. The end.